Hello and welcome to Divephoria. I'm here with Phreak, Kobe, and Drakos, who was too scared to do an intro, so we were just sitting here, and I had to do it.
I mean, that's not gonna be
Drakos, you got to pass him up. Let's go.
All right.
Your intro.
Hello and welcome to Divephoria
Ooh,
episode
good.
2.
Oh.
Ooh, not a fan of that one?
No,
Yeah.
it sounded exactly the same to me.
Well, that's so crazy.
All right. Well, then
I'm here with 3 of the saddest people on the face of the planet, all from North
We're
America.
smiling. I don't know what you're talking about.
That's
I'm here
fine.
with you.
I'm used to it, so it really doesn't
You-
faze
I
me.
feel the worst for you because it feels like you always take it.
I'm pretty
so
old.
personal.
I've been an NA representative before the LCS existed, so we're definitely used to it.
It's been a hard road. All right, your turn, Kobe.
Kobe.
Go.
Is Phreak last?
Yeah.
Freaks last.
Hello and welcome to the Divephoria. Best episode yet, on its way.
Wow, what a pose.
Hey, everyone. Welcome to the Dive Phoria featuring Drakos. We have 4 NA-born analysts on the desk to cover Europe's great success at Worlds.
Yeah.
But one European resident.
I knew that Phreaks was gonna have some flame in it.
He likes to bring it up whenever he can. Mm-hmm. It's like technically you're
And his
also a
greatest
failure.
export is casting. We've got like 8 of them out there.
Yeah. There you go.
That's all you can ask for. Phil, is that enough? Is one of those like you can cut that together into
We're
something?
using all 4, and
All right.
also that's also in the tape.
Also, that's awesome. We edit nothing. All right. It's available. This episode's available on any platform you normally listen to The Dive or Euphoria on. So check it out there, whether it's YouTube or otherwise.
How
Of
about
course,
Barbershop Quartet?
we want to do a barbershop quartet.
No. Is it available by Barbershop Quartet?
It depends. Are you ready to make a barbershop quartet in the next 30 minutes to sing this episode out to the people?
I don't even know what that means.
No one's coming to melody with me? All right. I was just saying the word sing in a note. I don't know what note it was.
You were just saying C, and I was like, is that a C?
Probably
I
not.
have a decent amount of
I'm sure
experience with music,
someone
but I'm also
perfectly knows.
tone deaf as fuck. So it's- all right.
Good
Groups.
start, Draco. Way to go, bud.
Yeah, this podcast sucks.
It's the dive at the front. It really just takes away from all the
It really took a
euphoria.
dive in this episode.
What else do we have left? All our teams are gone. We
got
just have to
memes.
sit here and meme.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, it's time to talk about World's groups, some quick hits. This is, do you want to start with the positive?
We'll make it
You want
real
to start
quick.
the fun, the positives, or the negatives?
Yeah.
There's 2 positives, there's 2 negatives.
Let's start with the positives, and then we'll get the negatives out of the way, then we'll talk about some positives again.
All right. Well, let's get, since it is Divephoria, let's start with, this is the first time the EU got all 3 of the teams out.
Woo! Congratulations.
Yes.
Very impressive.
Yes. If you're not singing the song Euphoria at this exact moment, please do so for the remaining duration of this episode, as I feel it's unfair if I just gloat the entire time.
No, you've earned that right.
You've earned it, yeah.
Yeah.
I think the coolest part about you getting all your seeds out, maybe the most miraculous one, was the Fnatic one.
Yeah.
Right?
Sure.
Because if we want to dive into all 3 of those, teams getting out, G2 are a little bit upset how they finished. They really wanted that first seed.
Yeah.
But Fnatic on the last day, I casted their game versus Clutch, and that was their first game of the day, and I was like, oh, it is going to be a rough day.
Yeah, we cast that game together, and I was like, oh my God.
And then the SKT game comes through, and some people are still like, oh, man, but that's weird looks from SKT. Faker's diving. They're going really deep. They're not respecting these stopwatches. And then the RNG game, and you're just like, all right, they're going to the top. Like you can't take away from that game. They absolutely outplayed them. They went right at the bottom lane at Uzi and took over.
The best part is like the split. As I walk up to the caster desk, I walk up and Vedius is like, "Oh God, they pick Lulu. They know something we don't. They're gonna smash us." And lane Yamato Can's like, "They pick Lulu. Are they inting? This one's free as hell." Like, it was just. I think every EU fan was just super anxious. Because one of 2 things happens with Hylissang's Pike. You either win the game at like 5 minutes, or the game is over at 5 minutes and he's 0-4 down.
Yeah. I want to tunnel on RNG a little bit, because I was not happy with Uzi playing 3 games of Ezreal that day. I thought that was
Pretty
pretty
troll.
XD. Like, he played a bunch of Xayah, and I was like, yep. And then it's like, now you're funneling an Ezreal. I mean, like, yeah, Ezreal's fine, but like, there are so many better champions. If you're going to play RNG Uzi style, which is give him all the gold, Azael is not your champion.
Especially alongside of Lulu. That
that's also
really
terrible.
Make any sense to me? I always feel like you want like a crit scaling marksman or an attack based marksman alongside Lulu, and like having all these champions around it, like Lulu and whatnot, to try to enable it. Funneling all the farm into him on this Ezreal. It didn't feel like it worked alongside the rest of their draft, but I think that was such an exciting day. Not only because of just the game 1 to the last 2 games of the day, like the improvement and the kind of the change there from Fnatic, but also, you had to look at week 1 to week 2, where Fnatic did not look good at all with the nonstop Garen Yumi stuff. They were really, really struggling, and they turned it around completely, and I think it's really cool to see how they have been able to do that a couple times now. They had the 4-0 run a couple years ago, and they've kind of just been able to be a team that is able to recognize what they were doing wrong in the first week, actually correct for it, and immediately apply that to their games to be able to take down some of the best teams, which I think is really, really impressive.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the issues that really, like, the draft thing is the thing that people are always going to see, right? Like, Buppo's not playing Shen anymore. There's no more Garen Yumi on the bottom side of the map. But, like, also just individual levels of performance were significantly higher, right? Like, Buppo seriously stepped up. Brox has seriously stepped up. I don't know if, Garen Yumi bot lane got any better. Hard to say. That one, I think, is more probably defendable as a champ issue. Hard to be critical of a Garen Yumi lane. They all kind of do the same thing. But, I was stunned. I was blown away. I cannot, in good conscience, say that I believed in that run. I wanted it. I thought it'd be super cool if it happened. I did not hold the faith. I was blown away by the SKT win. Not at all surprised. The clutch game, that was like, all right, this is the level I was expecting. We're probably not making it out, but at least we're making a good show of it. And then it just kept coming.
Yeah.
And
history's on your side, right? Like the stat was something like, 2-9 or something that Reckless is against Uzi. Like
1-9 before that game.
1-9 before the game. Okay, so it's 2-9 now, right? And it's like, that's just how they matched up. Like RNG had Fnatic's number, and that's how history went. And again, props to Fnatic. Like, that's a deserved win. That's a good job. But yeah, the like right vote based on looking at pedigree and history and everything else and form. It's like, yeah, RNG is like, it's weird because it's something that this gets a little bit off topic. Is like talking about like who is better on the day versus who's just better. And it's like, well, welcome to LAN tournaments. It doesn't really matter who's theoretically better. It matters how you perform when the pressure's on. And when the pressure was on,
nice Reckless quote, by the way.
Yeah, of course. But like when the pressure's on, RNG picked Ezreal Lulu. It's like, well, so Fnatic's better than you then.
So a lot of people were diving into the champion select, and attacking specifically, their bottom lane champion choices. When those are locked in, I did see from RNG's point of view, like at least for the Ezreal, Uzi had massive success with harassing in lane and gaining a lot of lane priority with Ezreal, like I've seen from almost no other marksman. The way he harasses with Ezreal while maximizing CS in lane was very good, and he got to his 2-item power spike. He was doing the Trinity Force build, not the Iceborne Gauntlet build. So he had a lot of damage output on that. And then, like you're talking about though, when you pair the Lulu with it, you're like, okay, there must be something like specifically to counter Pyke here with the Lulu, because that is definitely doesn't synergize that well with Ezreal. And I think that was the biggest misstep. As much as you're like, okay, yeah, I'd love to see Uzi on, a more hyperscaling marksman. I think the Lulu was the one where they thought that there was some sort of counter here with the ult knockup or something, trying to counter Pyke ultimate. When he goes in for the execute, you get him up above the threshold, knock him up, like kill him or something like that. But if Hylissang is flashing on you level 2, killing you with Pyke, and then they call Broxa down, like I just thought that the reaction from Fnatic was the important part there.
Yeah.
Where a lot of people are like, oh my God, there must be something with this Lulu pick, right? It's this crazy counter pick or whatever. And Fnatic are like, that's a nice pick there. Let me test it for you. And they throw all their resources down there. They attack it. And that's how they succeed, right? You don't succeed by being scared and waiting for it to unfold. They attacked it. And that's, how they found success.
And it's just so weird to me because the Kai'Sa's up. I felt like as a European viewer that the Pyke was super telegraphed. I mean, second phase, Blitzcrank, Nautilus, Leona, and Rakan all banned away from Hylissang. Morgana's up, RNG out to blind pick the Gnar and say, hey, we'll save support pick for last. They go for the Lulu. Not that would have saved the day, but like you could see the Pyke coming. I feel like you had to know that pick was coming, and maybe you wanted to hold on to something, but at the end of the day, Fnatic outclassed. And this is one of the sad notes about groups for me. This is the first time that RNG have failed to make it out of groups. And is it just draft issues are the thing we've pointed out so far. Is there anything else that you think stood out for them, or is it just these like the one game against SKT and then this one game against Fnatic, and suddenly their dreams are crushed?
Well, I mean, they lost both their games against SKT, right? So I don't think it's simply draft. And I think draft is just always the easiest thing to point to, and it's something the community always likes to point to. You know, it's what got talked about in the TL versus IG game. It's what gets talked about in a lot of games. Anytime someone loses, the draft is bad. If they win, the draft is good, right? There's a reason I'm sure that they picked that Lulu. And my immediate assumption with things like that, I didn't understand it on paper. I didn't like it on paper, but my guess is that this is working really well for them in scrims, right? That they had played it into Pyke before and been able to utilize polymorph and things like this to actually, stop the Pyke from going in and out of the fights and killing him that way. That's kind of the benefit of the doubt I guess I would give them. But it came down also to execution, right? Like I don't think that, Xiaohu had the best tournament. I don't think that for as much as Uzi had these incredible stats, I think sometimes it's kind of like at the expense of his teammates. There are times where he's been given so much farm and the strategy maybe wasn't like fully cohesive, especially in cases like this where even if he is dominating on the Ezreal, it can be difficult at times to I think rely on that if the other members aren't stepping up and you're giving kind of all your farm to this one member. But we're obviously going to dive pretty deep on some of these teams for the quarterfinal stuff, so we should probably keep rolling because this is just going to be like the quick three.
Well, then let's just really quick hit as another positive. First time Korea got 3 seeds out. We're obviously going to talk about all 3 of those teams again, but just in general, any like quick thoughts from group stage? Anything that you think Korea did exceptionally well? Anything that caught you off guard with like how good Damwon, SK Telecom, and Griffin were playing?
I was pleasantly surprised with how much they turned it up, because in everything but the SKT case, it was a 2-1 first week into a 3-0 second week. And especially in the Damwon case where it's like, well, they looked okay-ish during play-ins. Like they lost that game to low key, and I actually put them third in my pick'em because I was like, okay, if this is their form now, like they're just on this patch forever, and like people can watch the tape of the games they played. Like, all right, this is a beatable team, and then you go into week 2 and they smashed.
Yeah, I mean, I think Damwon is the coolest of the stories because coming in, everyone expected SKT to be really good. Probably the only question around Griffin was, would their failure in previous finals transfer somehow with pressure of Worlds games
and also the staff drama, right? Like I think there was a lot of stuff going on,
and a lot of the staff drama. But to me, Damwon, I always left a little bit of room of improvement because these are such young players coming from challenger team. Like these are rookies that are going to this big stage for the first time, and everyone knew that like they're super talented. But I was like, okay, well, we have seen a lot of teams go through play-ins and have growth throughout the tournament. Like Cloud9 last year for us, they went to 5 games in the play-ins and then placed furthest for us, right? So I definitely left room. I didn't necessarily expect for the domination to really come through, but I think now that we have seen the growth over the tournament of this team, I'm extremely scared. I think that all 3 of the Korean teams are looking incredibly strong. Plus, we've even seen I think Grabs or some G2 staff members have come out talking about their scrim records against these teams. And how strong they have actually been in practice, and how they were like, oh my goodness, we actually got them drawn in quarters. This is going to be incredibly difficult.
Yeah, I did hear that G2 for a while, at least towards the start of the tournament, towards the play-ins, was getting clapped by Damwon in scrims. So we'll see, especially as that quarterfinal comes out. Please get it together, G2.
My one kind of note for the Korean teams in general, and this is something I've kind of realized over the years, and it was something I saw also in SKT mic check, is that I don't think they really prepare individually for a lot of the teams in their groups. I think that they're just focusing so much on their own stuff and making sure that they have their own style, their own play, their macro stuff, their vision, all these kind of like League of Legends basics down pat, and that is what they focus on. So sometimes they're going to drop games because they're surprised by what teams are bringing out, or they're not particularly prepared for those individual teams, right? In the SKT mic check that they released against RNG, Faker doesn't even know who RNG's top laner is, right? He still thought it was Zatai, I believe, or maybe he thought it was Let Me, and his teammates thought it was Zatai, right? But like it wasn't either of those guys. They obviously didn't study up on this team coming into it. I think that they're just so damn confident that if they focus on themselves and their own preparation and their own play style, that they're going to get out of groups regardless. So they can just go into it a bit blind. They practice up. Week 2, they make adjustments based on week 1, and then they prep heavily for best of 5 when it comes to quarterfinals. And I think that's often why we see the huge LCK ramp up going into quarters, because then it's specific tailored game plans to their opponents.
The one that, you want to go ahead?
Well, it's funny because SKT, to me, this tournament came in with the most preparation that I've seen from them. With their first game coming out and swapping the Kayle bottom because they're expecting the free lane. Those types of adjustments, I thought they actually came in with some really well played plans. So,
but is that playing their opponent, or is that just something that they want to do? Is more what I'm saying, right? I'm not saying they don't prepare.
It's taking into account the specific picks that they're expecting, right? If you're expecting, these people play Garen Yuumi a bunch, that could just be coaching staff and not so much the players paying attention to the names of other players or whatever. But whatever form it is, to me, there was a lot of preparation and opening up the World's group stage with them coming out straight out of the bat with something like that, I thought really showed to how much work they're putting in, how much this year means to them with SKT not getting here last year, the fall of Korea basically last year. Felt like all three of the teams came in with a lot to prove, and they've been working extremely hard.
Yeah, I'm kind of still parsing through the idea of like how much prep they're putting in because.
To be clear, just quickly, I'm not saying that they're not prepping.
No.
I'm saying it's just not tailored
prep.
gameplay.
So
yeah,
here
it just seemed like more like Kobe was arguing a different side than what I was trying to say.
Sure. So either way, on that topic though, right? Like, Faker is not the one who's making the draft plans. So it's like, okay, if Koma and the rest of the coaching staff are, if they're the ones saying, okay, well, I know who these players are, I know what their champ selects, are, I know what their priority is. Like, as long as they're just rattling off, like, okay, well, you're gonna ban Yuumi here. Faker doesn't have to know who Hillsong is, as long as the coach is like, no, we ban Yuumi here because the coach knows, right? And like, as long as that's going on, like, I don't care if, Faker watches 0 VODs of his opposing players ever in his life. Like, okay, maybe you might want to know rookies' tendencies or something, or maybe you have an analyst who like preps a 5-minute highlight of like, here's how this guy lanes, right? I'm not sure because, I mean, in like a one-on-one game, if you're like playing Warcraft 3 or something, like, okay, you might want to like, you're actually playing one-on-one with the person, and it's really valuable what you get out of that because you can actually play on their tendencies. But League's 10 people, and like, I might know exactly how Doublelift plays, but like, that doesn't matter in the grand scheme of things. Like, there's other things I could practice. So I'm not like, I can see either one being valuable. I'm not sure. Like, I haven't played a professional MOBA as a professional player.
Yeah.
So, I don't have personal experience of what is the right way to prepare for something like this. Like, maybe it is correct that Faker should watch some RNG VODs, right? But
and I feel like their preparation is makes sense, right? Because if you're a strong enough team that you know that you're going to get through regardless, why actually waste the time prepping for individual teams when most of them are actually going to be knocked out before quarters, right?
Sure.
And then spend your time, because I do think if a match is close, individual tendencies actually matter a lot, right? If you know that a player is apt to roam, if you know that a player tries to look for these sorts of base timings or is always warning on one side of the map, or these little individual things that you can actually play around and take advantage of, I think it's really big, especially if you're talking about jungle. I think certain junglers have tendencies and routes that they sometimes, really do prefer to go for, that there can be, things that are kind of tipping someone's hand where you see them at a certain place on the map at a certain time and you're saying, okay, now they're going to be doing this next, right? So to me, I think that does matter quite a bit, but I think it only matters if it's an incredibly close match, right? Because then it's the little degrees of differences, right? When you have the SKT Rocks type of series and it's this much between winning and losing the whole thing, then you want any tiny advantage you can get. But if it's SKT versus Clutch, well, they don't need to prep for Vulcan because
They don't need to know what time it is.
no,
nope, it doesn't matter.
Because
it was
never Tanner time.
It was never Tanner time.
It doesn't matter what time it is. Faker is still going to.
Yes.
yeah.
Just as a note on that cast, I was like so ready to be upset so many times. Quickshot just kept baiting. He was like, you know what time it is? Because X do, because they have 3 stopwatches. I was like, oh my God, stop saying
I remember that one specifically.
Oh, wow.
Just the constant stream of baits.
All right, well, you actually said you were going to start with a positive, then do negative, then do positive, but we did both positives already, so I know what's coming.
The negative was first time RNG failed to get out, which we hit, and now it's time for Korea did great. Maybe the last year just a fluke.
Yep.
But this now is where we get to, I think, the Misery Podcast Power Hour, as I like to call it. And it's NA fails to get a team out of groups.
I wanted to quickly touch on though you slipped in there. Maybe last year was a fluke for Korea.
Yes.
I think that last year was a really big growing experience and change for Korea. Not a fluke. I think it was well deserved, and they took it to heart. And a lot of their teams changed how they look at the game, and that's why we've seen this big resurgence for them. But anyways, now we can get onto your NA topic here. It's definitely
Just as planned.
yeah, just as planned, so that we get the spotlight now, right? Exactly. We're the only representatives.
Got 3 of you here. This is the most important topic of the day. It's why there's 3 North American casters invited. One. I'm waiting for you to say something snarky.
I'm just looking at you. You're just sweating in your seat.
Also because Frost is sick, and we hope she gets well soon.
Yes.
Yeah, everybody's
NAU
been
caster.
getting really sick so far on this trip.
Everyone's had at least
Yeah, I mean, NA team's not getting out. Does it suck? Yeah, sure. But also, I can't say any of it is super surprising, right? If I was being fully honest about what I thought was most likely, if I had to put my money where my mouth is, I didn't have Clutch getting out. I had them getting 4th. I had C9 most likely getting 3rd. I think opportunities to get 2nd if Griffin, with all the staff drama, underperformed, if they choked, as I know, for as much as people say, oh, they only lost to SKT, a better team, I still maintain the Pantheon Talia series, running that back over and over and over, was a choke. But whether it was a staff choke or a player choke doesn't really matter. So, if they perform poorly, maybe Cloud9 sneaks out of that because they've had some miracles. And then TL was in a hard group, right? They're up against Damwon and IG, and I think that their group was going to be largely dependent upon, can they play extremely clean, and also does IG from Summer Split show up, or does IG from Spring Split and international events show up? And I think that's the team that we actually saw, because if you watched a lot of LPL throughout summer, Rookie was actually horrible when he came back. He was nowhere close to the level that he has shown at international events. Not only was he making terrible decisions, the solo laners, the solo laners were not synced at all with their jungler. He was making individual mechanical errors, like you're saying, he was whiffing Kiana ults, he's whiffing Aurelia ults, and none of that was there at all, right? He was performing incredible, and he was slamming lanes. And so, it's not shocking either that TL didn't get out of that group. It's a very difficult group. So am I disappointed that there's no representation for NA in quarterfinals? Of course. Am I absolutely surprised? Do I think it's some massive underperformance or anything? No, right? I think it's like there was a chance that TL could have got out of the group. They didn't. The other ones make sense.
So what I would bring up though is, agree with you, right, on all those points. My pickings were optimistic, and that was maybe CNA gets 2nd, and maybe TL tops the group if both teams underperform. So that point, hard agree. Though the thing I want to do to sort of twist the knife is, but our expectations are already low for NA, and they still disappointed those, right? It's we're hey, maybe C9 number 2 is good enough to get 2nd in this group, but I'm still putting him 3rd. No, they actually went 2 and 4, and they actually barely won the games they did win. And it's hey, TL, they won the LCS, MSI finalists, they beat the defending world champions. Yeah, but putting them out of the group is optimistic. Oh, they also got 3rd. It's well, actually turns out we're just the 4th best region. And that's pretty much undeniable. And it's hey, you know what? 4th is pretty good. We're going to get our groups to MSI next year probably. But that's the level, right? Fnatic had a hard group, and they went 1-1 against 2 of the best teams in the world. C9 had a hard group and went 0-4. It's okay, well, that's just the level of our teams.
But I mean, being 4th best is I think where we already thought we were at, and I think it's just disappointing that we didn't get anyone out, right? And we are also coming off of 2 of our best international performances ever, which is I think what makes it sting a little bit more, because it was finals at MSI, it was semifinals at Worlds last year, so people are hopeful that you can get that one team out and they can have a good performance, or TL gets out and then gets a good quarterfinal matchup and makes semis again, or something like this, which I think there was always the possibility of that, but of course it sucks. And I mean, the team I'm most disappointed in really is C9, because I do think that they just looked bad, and it was disappointing to not see Svenskeren starting. Clearly there had been scrim issues or whatever, or they decided that was a better plan there, but that was a shocker
having
to
seen
me.
Svenskeren a couple of those early games where he was in, are you still disappointed that he wasn't starting? Because
so it's hard, right? Because he comes in and they're already down, and he comes in against the good teams. He comes in, and I agree. That was especially who was it against with the Rek'Sai game? where he's playing Lee Sin and he goes up and he just queues in on the rec side where they have like Kale Top, who's like level 2, and that was like he actually just instantly lost both their solo lanes at like 3 minutes into the game. That was really, really sad to see. But it also is hard to pin all the blame on him when it's like your team is already screwed. I'm sure you're already incredibly disappointed that you didn't get to start when you're the MVP of the league. You played all but 4 games all year, and then you're not even starting at Worlds, right? But I do agree. He played bad in those games, and I understand why it could have happened, right? If the scrims are just absolutely horrible and you're getting slammed by everyone, then you have to mix something up. So I'm not saying they made the wrong choice, but I just mean the situation as a whole for C9 was really disappointing to me, and I expected better play, win or lose.
Yeah, I think people, even going about it in the pin blame on individuals type of analysis, looking back at things, I think is the wrong course, right? There were a lot of things that they were working through, and you can see the team had been struggling with. So
yeah, Niski also really underperformed.
Definitely a rough one.
A lot. Yeah. Niski was my big disappointment for NA because I thought he was actually very, very good domestically. I thought he like really stepped up. It was a really good year for him. He was one of the best players on Cloud9. He was part of the reason Svenskar was MVP because their synergy was so good. And Niski was getting just destroyed. And I understand the players he's against are very, very good as well, but like it felt like the old BKT games where it's like, oh no, this is Faker and mid difference. It was like just it felt so doomed.
One is a EU rep, right? Like Niski was really solid when he was here. You know, he played a really good season on Splice. He had a couple of fantastic games and like was one of the stronger players. And I was really sad to see him go. And it felt like domestically he was pretty solid. And I to be
really
honest,
good.
expected more from him. And you know, to see him getting hilariously behind in most lanes, and when he does have a lead, is very small. Is just like it's kind of difficult to watch, and it just felt like C9 as a whole, to me, compared to what we saw last year, just felt like lost. Whereas like last year's group stage, coming out for play-ins, they had like a lot of unique strategies specific to Vitality. They were able to pull off a lot of really clutch games, and like Licorice, who was still a monster this year, by the way, up until they stopped putting him on good champions. Was like. It was stunning to me to see this transition.
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of really good teams at the World Championship. None of our teams perform well enough to get out of groups.
Yep.
Ready to move on.
I want to say a positive there real quick, and I want to say a positive for Clutch because
yeehaw, they look fun.
Okay. So they got the actually hardest draw, right? Like,
yeah, for sure.
You replace Clutch with any other team in any other group, and that group is now harder for that team. Right, like immediately. So they had the literal hardest seeding that any team could have had, like regardless of how the seeds actually paired out. Right, SKT, RNG, Fnatic is probably the hardest 3 opponents that anyone else has. So yeah, they had 0-6, and yeah, they were gonna go 0-6. Right, like their level of play is not that high, and we knew that coming in. But I was still very pleased with them. Like Huni stepped back up this year. Demonte, right, this is his I think 2nd year as an LCS pro. He's getting better and better. Big fan of Cody's son, big fan of Vulcan. Lyra was a player that I was really down on as well for a lot of this year, and like he had some very good games as well. And I was like, wow, I was generally happy watching Clutch play. This is a team I thought was going to go 0-6, and yes, they did, but a lot of those games were really close and really exciting, and I was like happy about that.
Okay, so I mean, yes, of course, a lot of people are going to share that happiness because they have lower expectations for this team, right? This team came from the bottom of the LCS.
Shouldn't be happy with 0-6.
Rose to Worlds.
I am.
But a lot of people, enjoy that style of play. For me, if I apply your logic to Team Liquid, I'm like, all right, Team Liquid, especially with how G2 are talking up Dom1 and how amazing they are, and Invictus Gaming playing much more like world champions Invictus Gaming, I have a high view of Team Liquid, and I was like, ooh, this could be like ending week 1 with all of them tied 2-1. I was like, yeah, that's about how it goes. We can either win or lose out of this group, and then there's only another single round robin of individual games. They didn't look good in the games that they did end up losing, so that's probably a big reason that you're gonna like take away. But like they didn't get completely like stomped, right? Like, and I'm like,
TL's the only team.
I don't feel completely terrible about this. I think that Team Liquid are a good team.
They are.
But yeah. Time to move on, please.
Yes. Okay. All right. Your suffering is over. Last thing before we move on to quarterfinals, just looking at the groups overall. Wanted to get your thoughts on the group MVP. If you had to give it up to anybody, who do you have your eyes on? Who was like the one player for me? Okay, so by the way, this is always comes up when we talk about MVP. I don't mean the objectively best player. I mean the player like the actual most valuable player on a team. Without this player, the team would not have gotten as far as it did.
I mean, I'm just gonna say I think the player that performed the best in the group stage. That's gonna be my definition. I say rookie. I think rookie was absolutely a monster. I think the way that he absolutely just destroyed lanes is something that we haven't really seen from any other mid laners in a long time. It feels like he is so lane dominant. He makes Jensen look like he can't compete whatsoever. In a counter matchup, right? The TL draft in that last game is completely designed to get Jensen this counter match. He solo kills him. He goes top. He wins 2 solo lanes in 2 minutes. We've seen him how he performed against Caps last year. It feels like he's in that kind of form, and I just think that when rookie is playing like this, he's the best player in the world. I think we've seen other players have incredible solo lane performances also, but sometimes at the cost of mistakes and over-aggression like we see out of the Shy.
Yeah, just to back that up really quickly, he has like 20% of his team gold, still does 27% of the damage. He has one of the most disgusting ratios of damage over gold. That is literally what it sounds like, just damage over gold. And you'd be surprised how many players are actually below 1 on that ratio. And it just seems like rookie is constantly making an impact somewhere on the map. He's always ahead of his opponent in damage dealt. He is probably the best. Hard to say at this point. We'll see how best of 5 goes, but I would say the best performing mid laner of the tournament.
And the only guy who had a higher CSD, like a better laning phase, was Uzi, right? And he averaged 12.5 CSD at 10, which I think is incredibly impressive, especially when he's playing multiple Orianna games. He makes Orianna look like this early game slam you champion, and it's just not fair.
Rookie was definitely one of the first players that came to my mind, especially because the Team Liquid game is still so fresh, right? And you see that and you're like, oh my God, he gets a solo kill, he immediately recalls backs with Moby boots, then
the game's over.
Then kills top lane in the matchup that we had previously used the Aatrox into Vladimir as one of our wins out of the first round, and completely turns that and just opens up the game. That's super fresh. The statement of best mid laner at the tournament is so hard because there's so many good mid laners, and I feel like when we're looking at stats, because they're all isolated with these different matchups, your group stats can be wildly different. Of course,
it's just dominance over your group.
Yeah,
it doesn't reflect actual top. Just like we could use domestic stats, that just shows how good he is against LPO.
We won't hold you to this later long.
Yeah, exactly. And we have also seen huge variance in individual teams, even on the same day from game to game, their performances. We're looking at maybe SKT is a good example, right? Having that Fnatic game, they look completely far worse, going for a lot of these risky dives, all of them getting turned around and getting outplayed in. Whereas previously everyone was like, oh my God, you know what? After the first round of groups, I'm very sure that either SKT or G2 are completely the front runners for this tournament. It felt like pretty much everybody was in a consensus for that after the first round, but so much changes when you play that second round of games. So some other names that came to mind when we were talking about this MVP thing, in looking at Griffin, I actually had 2 names pop up. And that's why I was like, oh, well, I probably can't give MVP to either if 2 names are popping up by yours. But Chovy and Tarzan, I think both were instrumental in getting them here. Obviously, again, it's recency bias looking at the G2 games for Griffin.
Sure.
But Tarzan completely out-jungles Jankos, and that's a huge part of it. I think that Tarzan had some rough games early on, and I also think that he got a bit predictable in his jungle path, which is why I was thinking of Chovy, and I was like, helps a lot when you have a Galio mid lane pushing the wave and saying, hey, Tarzan, go for whatever invade you want. I can Galio ultimate behind you. It's just, it was hard for me to separate, some of those things. I think both of those players also played super well.
I think some of that too is that when you look back at the first Taliyah game that he played against G2, it's so easy the second you see Taliyah use Q because the cooldown is so long for a G2 player to walk in and contest a camp, and you see the second that he swaps to Lee Sin or Qiyana, well, no one's walking over to contest that camp anymore because they know they're going to get bodied. So you think, to me, it looked like he identified some weaknesses of the champion. G2 had clearly figured out how to kind of exploit early game Qiyana because it's just once she uses Q on a camp, you can just walk up and contest her up until level 3 when the flick actually becomes a threat. And once he got back on the more traditional jungle champions at this tournament, he monstered Jankos on both sides of the matchup, right? those tiebreaker games were hard to watch, where it's like, oh, G2, you're going to take those champions, you're going to smash them. Like, I believe, let's go. And then you're like, oh, no. They have no idea what they're doing. Oh, God, it's like the most insulting and crushing way to lose. So
You watch one game, nerf Kiana. You watch the next game,
You're
man, this Kiana champion sucks.
Yeah,
why are
don't
people
jungle it.
banning this? This is awful. Doesn't do anything. The one I wanted to add to the list is I think that like a Fnatic player probably does deserve to be on here just because of the nature of the Miracle Run.
Oh man, the week 2 round, or
Yeah.
it's not even week 2 really, because we only separated
two
by one
games.
day. Yeah,
Second
The
Robin.
last
whatever,
two
yeah.
games.
Yeah.
And for me, there's a couple choices, but overall I think I'd give it to Nemesis. Brox's like week 1 was so abysmal that I don't think that really qualifies. Whereas I felt like Nemesis was a rock. Like even in the games where he was losing, he looked good. His Akali game was rough, but everything else was really solid. And obviously, as unexciting as Veigar is going to look as a pick, like at the end of the day, that is what won them the game, right? It's just like consistently placing the cage where it needed to be. I'm not going to talk about that Faker dive. You're looking at me like I'm going to credit him for outplaying Faker. I'm not going to say. I think Faker just ran it down in that instance, but
I thought it was exciting when that happened. I was excited.
Yeah, it was fun.
Because Akali dives in and then splat right in his face.
Yeah.
Gets ulted.
The name I want to add to the list is Showmaker, because I think back to their last day where the Shy is just, I mean, this is one of the most absurd landing leads I've ever seen.
You're talking about Jason to Vladimir?
Yeah, just like, oh my God. Like, it was funny because before as the game started, I was going through Champ Select and I was taking photos with some fans, and someone says, hey, who's going to do tons of damage in this game? And I see that Nagari's locked in Vladimir. I'm like, well, it's Nagari and Vladimir. He's already the highest damage share like top laner in this tournament. Like it's just him. And then I'm like, I could not be more wrong. He's dying, and then there's like this like big top lane fight where Showmaker comes in and like strings down 3 people, like legit 1v3 triple kill. Like every skill shot landed perfectly, and I'm like, yeah, he's pretty good.
and to put into context, it's a 41 CSD for the
Theshy.
Shy, for Theshy, and he had 16% less jungle attention in that early game, and still managed to build that.
Yeah.
jungle.
Okay. So I remember it very clearly. Like, isn't that the one where Nautilus support level 1 gets the Vladimir splash also?
He started
and
with level
they
1 first
get
blood.
a kill, like a level 1 first blood for Jace into Vladimir is just like punching them when they're down and then stomping them while they're on the ground and then flipping them over and stomping on them some more. Like that, I was just like, oh my God, this game, which makes your point stronger, I think.
Yeah,
because then they
Showmaker 1v9.
well,
then.
they
also
overdive
hard ran it.
They overdive in the top lane.
Ning overdived in the top lane. He ulted back in while his team was running away.
The rest of the team follows. That's why they got low, right? So like they overdive top lane, and then it made for a really cool moment in that game because you're like, oh, 3 kills on Showmaker. Like this is their hope. Like the game is not over because after the level 1, everyone's like, oh my God, this is gonna be a sweep. And you feel for Rookie because he's like sitting in lane, and this Akali comes back with 3 kills. Like, there's a completed Gunblade. He still has both summoners, and you're like,
It's like,
whoa.
guys, I don't know how to tell you this, but we were even. Things were fine in the mid lane. Can you? What happened? I thought we. The Shy at first blood, like everything was going great. Someone run that one back for me. Someone explain to me exactly how we lost 3 people.
Happens. That's the line. It happens. So those are candidates. They're mostly mid laners. Mid's really stacked this tournament. It's gonna be fun.
Super stacked.
I feel like it's every international tournament.
Well, it's
right?
also just
There's-
like-
That's
there's-
also true.
Almost always. I mean, there's some exceptions, but it feels like almost always you need an outstanding mid laner to be able to succeed internationally because the role is just the most important role in the league and has been for so long, and it feels like
Probably won't change ever.
Especially this year, jungle mid is so important to be able to get control over side lanes and be able to get division, and without that, it just feels like you just lose control over everything.
It's funny because for G2, one of the most consistently like strong forces, and one of the biggest parts about them heading into their quarterfinal that I was going to be looking at would be Perks, which is technically a mid laner, even though he's not a mid laner. But I also think that we'll get to it when we get to the discussion.
Yeah, we can get to it. I'll just say that, like in general, like any role that can move around the map, whether it's jungle support or mid, is always just going to feel infinitely more impactful. Because when the other 2 roles are just tied to a long lane, and outside of some crazy level 3 teleports from Perks early in the year, mostly they kind of just have to be there for the farm, and they don't really get to play League until someone comes to join them.
Unless you can flex 1v1, but that's you have less opportunities to do so, obviously.
All right, that's it for groups, and now we get to the meat of this podcast.
Were groups of potatoes?
Groups were the potatoes.
Okay, good.
We get meat and potatoes here
Hearty
in
German
Deutschland.
meal here.
Hearty.
Good.
They were the Spätzle, and now we're on to the
Oh, I
Spätzle.
love Spätzle.
You know what? I'm not eating potatoes anymore.
How dare you? Potatoes
Next
are
year,
delicious.
next
Spätzle
year,
also
no
not
potatoes.
No potatoes
Only
for
meat.
you. Yeah.
Only meat.
Okay.
Only straight to quarterfinals. You're not coming in. You're like,
I didn't-
That's the.
I didn't like
real-
this year's potatoes.
rough potatoes.
This year had some rough potatoes
That's the
for us.
real issue with seeding. The NA just doesn't start in quarterfinals.
Yeah,
that's why we're.
that
that's
was
why
really
we're
when
missing
NA was
out.
in.
Last
Yeah.
time that happened, Cloud9 lost to Fnatic in.
But they made quarters.
But they made 3 quarters.
But you remember that Phreak series though? That was some fun times.
that's the one quarterfinal we've ever won at Worlds. Yeah, good.
Oh.
Yeah.
was
Okay.
good.
All right. Out of the depression zone.
Back into
Back into
quarterfinals.
quarterfinals. First up, I want to talk about Danwon Gaming versus G2 Esports.
I'm actually so hyped for this.
Yeah, it's so close.
Especially because of the stuff coming out where they're like, oh my god, we've been scrim against Damwon. That's our worst scrim record. These guys are so strong. Plus, how incredible the solo laners are, and the race on the ladder right now in ranked, where Caps still hold. I think he retook first place in EUS ranked, but all 3 of the Damwon top side of the map players are
And that was
right
yesterday
behind him
too. That was a tweet from yesterday. I'm pretty sure
Yeah.
they're talking about. So that could be changed
they-
already. Someone else could have taken.
It's
the
like
spot
it's
from
like
him.
Caps is like barely running ahead with these 3 Damwon players chasing him in ranked. Like they're already adding tension to it before you even get to the quarters.
Yeah, I think they're really good. It's like, to me, there's like 2 super close quarterfinals where I'm probably going to switch my pick'ems 5 times leading up to the match. I'm still not going to be sure I'm right. The other one being Fnatic Fun Plus. And it's just like, yeah, this is just like a very, very tight match. I like, what else can I say other than like, this is really, really close and they're 2 of the best teams in the tournament.
Here's my fear, right? Is that coming in, I think most people would go, it's fine. Perks, Mickey, Nuclear Barrel, doesn't matter how strong top side is, our bot side is going to win. G2 were losing scrims. And I'm like, okay, but like, how are you losing that many scrims if Nuclear is as big of a perceived weakness as I see him to be? And my concern is like, maybe they're not that bad. Maybe Perks and Mickey just aren't that good. If they're already losing scrims to this team, I get more and more scared. Like, I am so ready to like jump off the boat at any moment on the G2 hype train because of you watch those tiebreakers, hear about them losing scrims, you see how close every series they ever play is outside of the finals at MSI, and I just get nervous. Like, this is such a hard team to bet on.
I will say that we've been misled by scrims a lot at Worlds tournaments almost every year. So
Scrims don't always mean anything. We'll have to see. But Nuclear, I will say, as much as they were talked about as a weakness, I do think he ran it down in a lot of LCK games. Has had some really big mistakes, but it hasn't been lane where he's been getting exploited, right? He's basically going even. He's negative 0.8 CS at 10. It's nothing, right? And I think that they have been using these non-marksman picks sometimes to pretty good effect. That's what they did both games against TL. They ran Veigar and then the Yasuo Gragas. So, they are fairly flexible and showing that here too. My big concern for G2 going into it is actually Jankos. I don't think that Jankos, compared to expectation, had a good actual performance in the group stage. It wasn't just the Kiana in that last game against Griffin. He actually, both his Kiana games were really quite poor. I can't even remember who the other one was
Team
against.
Liquid, I think.
Wrong group.
Oh, just kidding.
Yeah. I can't remember.
Cloud9.
No, wait.
It was against.
It was
against
against
Cloud-
Blabber.
Well, okay,
Remember,
yeah,
he died like
whatever.
a million
NA
times.
team.
Yeah. Okay.
Because I remember Jankos was like, or they were talking about their team comps, and they were telling him like, "Yo, Jankos, you're feeding kind of hard now. You need to calm down with that." And then they still won.
Yeah, and they did still win, and I think that we know Jankos can be incredible. He was the MVP of the LEC. Vedius had him as his #1 player at Worlds. I definitely don't think he lived up to that in the group stage, and I think that's certainly fair to say. But he needs to have a really, really good performance because I think Canyon was incredible for Damwon in the group stage. I think he was really, really standout and had worked well even with the bottom lane to put them ahead in some of these games. Utilizing especially I think of the Talia game, comboing up with Barrel's Poppy. They had a lot of really good plays around there. So we need to see Jankos playing a really, really strong game. And I think if Kiana is going to be this huge power pick, one of the biggest things that G2 has always had going for them is their flexibility and their ability to really execute on every different pick. That's always been, I think, their greatest advantage. They can flex them anywhere and they can all perform on it. So I really want to see Jankos be able to bring out a great Kiana game, because in a best of 5, if you lose one red side ban every game, that can actually be the difference here. So I'm really hoping that they're putting in the practice on the Kiana, and whether it's him or Caps or whoever's going to bring it out, I think that's just such an important pick, because we have seen it solo win a lot of games, whether it was Rookie, whether it was Tarzan, whether it was like some of the other mid laners bring it out in the groups. Like I believe Tien also had a really good game.
She's the number 2 champion maybe of the tournament right now, behind the obvious Pantheon. The thing I want to bring up about G2 is I think they will look better this coming weekend. They'll look better in the quarterfinals. And I mean this sort of charitably, that overconfidence, I think, has been some of their downfalls so far. I think back to the stream clips of Jankos before World started, where he was like, someone asked him on stream, like, so how's scrims going? And he's like, we started scrimming the Chinese teams, and I have nightmares every morning. My jungle invaded by 7 people, and I die every time. And it's just like he's kind of going to the camera. But I actually got to talk to him in person a couple days ago, and I was like, so like really like how true are these scrim stories? Like, well, we came in thinking we were the best team in the world, and then these games are actually pretty close. Like, turns out that we have to work pretty hard to like make this championship work. So, they're tougher games than we thought. I was like, okay, that tempers that somewhat. And then when G2 lost their first seed to Griffin, there was the Perks interview on the day, and he's like, yeah, we lost today because we were overconfident. Some of that being that G2 beat them last time. So like, all right, cool. Yep, best team in the group, no problem. And like, I guess Griffin snuck up with them a little bit. Like, maybe they played a little bit looser than they should have. At this point, you're like, okay, well, we lost first seed. Like, we know Dam1 are good. Like, I think G2 will play some of their better League of Legends on their match, and so they'll look better than what we have seen of them so far at Worlds.
I agree. I do think that there are a couple of extreme things too with people discussing G2, and one of the extremes is people kind of writing off all of their mistakes as like the happy games and stuff like that, which I'm not on board with.
Sure.
I do think that they can play better, and there is also inherent risk in some of the plays that they go for, right? And some of the style that they play the game with, which can also fail. So I think it's important for people to separate those two, and not clump everything into the happy game style.
Every
but
death
also
is not just taking it not seriously. It's like every death sometimes is, well, their game has risks,
right, and
their picks have risks.
Right, you get both sides of it, right? You get the super dominant when these work out, and you can snowball off that very quickly. That's why G2 come in with all these insane stats that we're talking about when we're peppering, like fastest games, most kills, all this stuff. That is the reason.
Mm-hmm. And I think for me, that's like what always makes it hard. And that's what I mean when it says it's hard to jump on the G2 ship. And Perks has said this a few times, and I've repeated it now a few times, but when they int together. And like when they do dumb things, like usually they continue to do dumb things, and you have these catastrophic early games where, especially against Cloud9, that Jankos, that first Kiana game where Blatt was just destroying him at every turn. And now also this additional Kiana game. And it's hard to know. I won't call it a happy game, but it's hard to know like how much of this is 1 or 2 players making a single mistake, and how much of this is like they're getting just outclassed, how much of this is like they actually just aren't making the right call in the moment. And it's so difficult for me to know how much of G2's successes to take away is, wow, you guys are so good, you guys are so smart, versus like, were you in the right place at the right time? And at the same time, it's so hard for me to take anything away from them and say, wow, you guys like really suck at Kiana. And it's not just an off day, like, because who knows, right? Like you talk about scrims not always valuing, maybe they popped off on Kiana like 1,000,000 times, and then just on the day, Jankos is doing dumb things that he wouldn't normally do because he's like, oh, we're going to try this risk. This will get us like a massive lead if I pull this off.
And some of that is best of 1 or best of 5. Like if you are a team that takes risks and all of your plays are 60-40s, in a best of 1, that's really good odds to lose. In a best of 5, if every game is 60-40, your odds are really high you win the BO5. It's probably not a 3-0, but like small advantages mean like, or small variance washes out in longer series, and that's why I think that their stock really does go up in things like this.
And to be fair to Jankos, it's an assassin jungler, right? So when you look good, you look really fucking good because you get those early kills and you start snowballing and Kiana starts one-shotting everyone. If just 1 or 2 plays go poorly for you early, you can get behind the curve, and oftentimes if Kiana can't one-round people, you don't really look that good. I would also say, as much as Nuclear had been able to kind of withstand the storm, I think in their group, as far as people who could punish that, I think Perks has got to be up there, not only because of his individual performance, but because also, again, of that flexibility, right? If there's anything that they look to blind pick, Perks can play, the Yasuo Gragas stuff. He can play mages. He can play all the marksmen. He has so much flexibility that he has lots of different ways to counter this. So if they decide, okay, we're going to go Vhagar and just try to play it slow and play it defensive, well, maybe Perks is able to bring out something like the Zoe or something long range and pokey and dominate it in lane or whatever, right? I think there's multiple ways for them to attack that. So I do think that's looking good for them. And I also think Caps was kind of getting overlooked a little bit coming into this tournament. He wasn't on Betty's top 20, the one G2 player that wasn't on it. I think he had one of the best performances, if not the best performance from G2. He was really consistent. He was getting big advantages. It felt like, as much as the G2 thing that you said was, if they ant together, he was often the one holding it together, right? Yeah. And split pushing and taking turrets and creating pressure. And if Caps is on, he is such a monster. And I think that spells so many good things for the team, because we know that if G2 can get an advantage, they're so good at snowballing it. They're so good at spreading it across the map, and that's one of the avenues I think that they really have to try to take over in this series.
Yeah, coming into this, doing the research on all of these teams, even though we haven't seen the bottom lane for Invictus make these mistakes that you're talking about, where
Invictus
for Dom 1
or for Dom 1, I'm trying to remember the exact VOD right now. That's why I'm pausing. But a lot of the mistakes are decision making mistakes from him that I remember being oh my god, this is the guy that can lose them the game.
Yeah.
When he Kai'Sa ults super far, or when he wastes a lot of summoner spells, or it's a couple of these decisions that caused me coming into the tournament to be yeah, their bottom lane is going to be the part that can lose them these games. This was why I was talking about Perks earlier. I think that's going to be one of the big strengths for G2.
Mm-hmm. Their loss against TL, I think he did less than a third of double-list damage, for example.
Yeah. So even though his group stage we're talking about, it hasn't been an int group stage for him. I still think that in the best of 5, that is an area that I would be worried about if I was on the Dom 1 side. The thing that's super interesting to me is that both Showmaker and Caps both have had huge roaming play styles at different points, right? And I think that them working with their junglers early on is going to determine a lot of how these games go. Showmaker is super famous for even the Renekton style stuff, right? So the champion select for mid lane jungle duos and how they use those to get priority to roam to the side lanes, I think is going to be something that both coaches are focusing heavily on.
Anytime it comes down to that, I do feel like you got to give a small edge to G2 because of that flexibility that Isaac mentioned earlier. Just because Perks is willing to play a lot more bot side, and I think that the bot lane pool, as wide open as it is for non-meta picks in terms of AD carries, there's basically 2 champions, right? And if you find yourself picking Ezreal, I do think you're at a disadvantage in any given game. Obviously, the champion can still do a lot, but you want a Xayah or a Kai'Sa on the bottom side if you're looking for an AD carry threat, a marksman threat. So I do feel like while mid jungle is inevitably the most exciting part and the part that I'm going to look at the most, I feel like G2 have to have an edge, just because, even though Nuclear has played the mages, just because, one, of how much they're willing to flex, and 2, because of how small what I would consider the viable pool of bot laners is at this tournament.
Well, speaking of bot laners, I think we should talk about next matchup.
What about Nuggery?
I think we're spending a lot of time in this matchup.
Okay.
Yeah.
And this is only so long of a podcast.
That's true. All right. We'll
Fnatic
move on.
Go ahead. Please.
He's the one who brought it up.
I was just gonna say, I think it's at least worth touching on him, right? Because he is such a strong player, and also his play style, I do think warps a lot of the Dom 1 games, right? He's going to play this very greedy style. So he's going to play Klepto and Cull and all these sorts of things. We've seen him take Cull and Renekton. We've seen him take Cull and Vladimir, and he's going to be playing this sort of greedy style where he's trying to outscale very oftentimes and create incredible advantages through that. So all I really wanted to say was just that I think G2 also have to take that into consideration, where if you try to spend too much time focusing on the bottom lane and trying to punish that, then it can be at the expense of Nuguri kind of getting a bit of a free lane and being able to, sometimes kind of get away with some of that greed.
I would say also there have been 2 times already where I was looking at Nuguri. One was against Impact, where he loses track of Impact in the side lane, face checks into the brush. Of course, that turns into the Baron for Team Liquid, and actually was Team Liquid's win. And then also in the game with the level 1 Nautilus, you don't have to burn Flash there. Like, he doesn't level up. He doesn't. I mean, I don't think
he leveled up Q
already going to lane.
Well, I don't know if it was going up to lane, but I mean, that was
either way.
You should have leveled W or early flash.
Either way, flash the hook. Don't wait so long. Like, there are things where we have seen him get exploited. So
I mean, the thing is I think both of these top laners is like Nagari's like the more visible one because of the Klepto, because of the Colks, all the crazy stuff that he does. And while Wonder has had some good moments, and like obviously in one of the Cloud9 wins, he kind of came back after getting bodied by like Christian Lane just because of the nature of Vladimir, and the rest of the map was doing really well. Like, it has not been the cleanest tournament from Wonder either. And this is definitely like, these two guys are definitely players who can, on the Vladimir, if you get them to late game, carry team fights. But in the same vein, if like Nagari has a very dominant early game champion and you leave him alone and Wonder's having one of those days where he makes a lot of mistakes, as he has already had this tournament, like, I have no doubt in my mind that Nagari can blow that matchup open.
All right, which quarter do you want to go to next, Phreak?
I was going to say it. We were talking about bot lane. FunPlus versus Fnatic, to me, is the other really tight one where I'm not sure who's going to win. And I think this is actually even more variance in performance, because to me, Fnatic was not a favorite to win Worlds. They were definitively worse than G2 to me. I thought, they likely would not get out of their group. But then, right, their day 2 performance, or their day 7 performance, whatever, was really, really, really good. Their top end beat SKT in an otherwise undefeated form. They beat RNG for the second time in their entire history. Like, that Fnatic is, maybe they actually win Worlds, and that's, pretty incredible. But like, they've already shown they can beat these very, very best teams, and if that's their actual form, then suddenly, the gloves are off, and that's incredible. At the same time, you have FunPlus, who is my number 2 team coming in to Worlds because they won the LPL, and I believe the LPL was going to be really strong. And then we watched them play, and it was like, that's not their form. So the question is, like, do we get LEC Fnatic, or do we get Day 7 Fnatic? Do we get LPL FunPlus, or do we get Worlds FunPlus? And like, one of these teams 3-0s the other. In either way, right? So it's like, I don't know the answer.
I mean, I wish I had a good answer for you. I think Fnatic's, if we had come from like LEC Fnatic, which I think we did see more of on this like Day 7, this very early game, very aggressive, focused kind of play style. You had a bit more unique picks. You had Bwipo playing comfort even when it wasn't necessarily like the strongest meta pick, things like the Urgot, things like the Aatrox. Mm-hmm. Like, I believe in that team to like fight and go toe-to-toe with FPX in the early game and to potentially like to win this series. But like, they got such a bad read, is what I'll credit it to, on that first week, and so many different underperformances that it's hard for me to have total faith. That said, when they got doubted, they showed up and they blasted people. And on the opposite side, FPX is such a weird team to me, because on the one hand, they started with some really terrible games, and then outside of that Splice game on the final day, they were pretty much just smashing and running through. So while it is high variance, I think the only reason, like, I know more about Fnatic, and I've seen that variance from them historically, and usually it's like weeks at a time before they get out of a slump and they come back. Today it was a few days. Do they stay? Does that go back? I don't know. This is very new territory for me. Whereas FPX, because I have less knowledge, I'm willing to give those players the benefit of the doubt based on like reputation. Just because like Doinb is a monster, and while his champion pool is limited, can have these like incredibly just destructive mid lane games.
You could tell that FPX were feeling the pressure, though. I mean, even Doinb in his interview, I forget who was interviewing him, but he was asked, what have you learned from group stage? And he's like, I learned I need to play carry champions to carry my team.
Yep.
And I was like, damn, that's true.
That is true.
Because some of you're talking about like giving credit or whatever, to me, I know that it was early on, and I know that everyone just super tunnel visioned on the LWX game where he was like turbo inting on Kaisa.
Yep.
But I was like, man, that reckless quote about it doesn't matter what you did in the regular season. It matters who can handle the pressure on stage. That rings true in games like that, where your marksman player with like all of your damage for your whole team comp. It felt like one of those solo queue games where you're just like, hands up, there's nothing I can do. This guy just keeps ulting into the enemy team.
He's our damage.
We can't actually win a fight like that. So, honestly, I'm definitely have that very in the forefront of my mind right now, especially because even at the end, Doinbean's interview kind of addressing it there. I think that they're going to have to focus really heavily in these few days practicing coming into quarters if they want to have a performance like you're talking about, the LPL dominance that we saw from them, barely dropping any games all season. Almost like, what was it, 1 game off of being the most dominant LPL record of all time. They are really going to have to put in the work to get back to
I think they were tied for the best record in LPL history, I believe, and I think they
was
dropped
like
1 series and maybe the same amount of games or something like that.
It was incredibly close to being the most dominant. It wasn't quite like they didn't edge out EDG or something like that for one that had like a different amount of games. Something.
Yeah, I think the thing is, like what you're talking about, Drakos, as far as kind of giving them the benefit of the doubt with how skilled they are. You would in LPL, but these guys also haven't played internationally, right? And so many of them are so young. Doomby had never made it to international, to Worlds rather. Their bottom lane is incredibly young, hasn't been here. These guys haven't done it before, so sometimes the nerves really are a huge factor. I think FPX in LPL was insanely good. They were so good at snowballing advantages, so well coordinated in their team fighting. Even the laning phases, which I've seen them get criticized for, LWX was just slightly behind Uzi as far as laning stats. This is one of the best laning duos bot lane, some of the best team fighting in the world, the best snowballing team, and I think based on their Worlds group's performance, they are the worst #1 seed for sure. So I think that Fnatic has a good matchup. It is so hard to know which team is going to show up, but I'm not feeling confident that it's going to be the LPL team anymore because, coming into that event, I think if they played as they did in the LPL with that same level of confidence and that same level of skill, I thought they were actually the best team in the world. And they have not been able to replicate that level whatsoever. So I actually think this is a pretty damn good matchup for Fnatic, all things considered. And I'm really excited to see how they do because while Doomby can go away from these tanks and these sort of team fight style compositions, that was their bread and butter, right? That is actually how they were most successful with AP Nautilus mid. And as much as people criticize this Kai'Sa one threat type thing, LWX was 10-0 on Kai'Sa in the LPL. No one ever beat it. It was considered like just unstoppable, right? And they lost with that. So yeah, he can go on to the Renekton. Yes, he can have great carry performances. The thing is the team as a whole as comfortable with that style? That remains to be seen. That'll be interesting to see if they can do that. But if you lose one big facet of what made you so good, which was, I think, him being able to play these tanks in this roaming kind of style, it does, lower the strength of your team overall. And Nemesis has played incredible. And I think that picks like Cassio are fantastic if someone wants to go, the Scions and the tanks of the world, because you can just scale up and farm off that guy.
And a big part of those Doinby picks is him then playing with Tien and roaming, right? They roam together so frequently, and a lot of times to the bottom lane to help LWX get these crazy lane stats. And if the hard part is that there's been so much variance on both sides of this matchup, and you're looking at it and you're like, oh, is Broxah going to have like the RNG game Broxah where he goes bottom lane with that Gragas? They absolutely destroy Uzi and Ming lane, or is it going to be the round 1 where their entire early game is really lackluster? He's on the wreck side, can't find anywhere to go, and doesn't get anything off. Because if you do that versus and Tien actually does push lane with Doinby and link up and go roam and start creating plays, I feel like so much of this is going to be on who's the proactive team. And we did see both of the teams have more momentum at the end of group stages. So I'm actually pretty hyped for it to see which team is able to take that confidence. Right. We've heard about them being emotional teams.
If they're both on top form, it's maybe the most exciting match of the quarterfinals. If they're both on top form, that's super sick. If they're both on Clown Fiesta form, like we just saw Clutch Fnatic also on that. Right? Like
I'm so ready for 5 back-to-back games of Clutch Fnatic. Like I don't know who's casting this, but like that would actually be.
Please no.
Yes. I want that so much.
Can I speak up for everyone at home and say please no?
I would love to watch that.
Dope, except for the base race part at the end. That was real sad.
We need a new term. That wasn't a race.
I mean, it's tortoise in the hair.
How about a base false start?
This is Rostron has one of my favorite quotes, which is "You're so behind in this race, you think you're ahead." It's like you're literally getting lapped in Mario Kart right now. You're like, guys, I passed him. It's like, no, you didn't. You're still a lap behind.
You're on lap 2, bud.
The other little thing I'll touch on just with the mid lane matchup, because I actually think it's going to be so important, is that if they can't play tanks, so you remove Nautilus, second most played. Ryze is his most played. Bad matchup, I think, in a Cassio, which makes that pretty favorable. Pantheon was his third most played. Guess what? It's perm banned every game. Yep. His fourth most played, Kiana. Guess what? Almost always also banned. So unfortunate, I think, how things have kind of worked out for Doomby. If he's not able to play tanks, that 2 of his 4 most played are basically perm banned, and the other one is answered by one of his opponent's best champions.
Yeah. And the thing that I'll say is that Fnatic, when they're on their best form, the thing that I love about this team is how good they are at getting people into the mid lane. Mm-hmm. And like if that's already a weak point, if Doomby's already not on a champion that he's comfortable with or can't have as much impact on or is like more limited in what it can provide, Fnatic should be an excellent team at shutting that down, because that is something that like Hylissang is always roaming. Right. And that's usually like why in the regular season like people can meme Reckless's Karma, but why it was a good pick for Fnatic is because he could solo keep lane pressure and Hylissang could go do whatever he wanted, which more often than not, even if I will call him a bit of a coin flip player sometimes, was winning the game in another lane.
Yeah, I think we see 100% Cassiopeia ban this series. I think it's actually, unless they want to first pick it, which I don't think is going to happen, I think you just 100% always ban Nemesis's Cassio. And that's one of the things that I had seen maligned about Nemesis is actually I think his champ pool is a little bit shallow. And that we were talking about at the beginning of the show as well, like teams prepping for their opponents now that's best of 5. You get the whole week to go watch all the Fnatic VODs and churn through the stats. Like you can target ban some Fnatic players, and I want to see what that looks like when they get pressured.
And speaking of target banning, the other player I was going to touch on as far as pick ban, I think Reckless is going to be pretty important. People talked about, oh my God, he looks so good on Marksman. It's really just Xayah, right? And Xayah, I think, is incredibly strong. He doesn't really play Kai'Sa. He played 1 game of Kai'Sa in the summer split, nothing in playoffs. And, you said it yourself, Drakos. You think there's 2 marksmen.
There's 2 marksmen in bottom.
So if there's not other ones that he is willing to play, FPX can either ban or take away Xayah in probably a lot of the game. So that could put some pressure on him. Like, I want to see him be comfortable to bring out some of these others. And if he's comfortable to go, okay, we're just going to play Trist and Ezreal and Sivir and some of the others he's always kind of gone to, then that's great. And if they can make that work, it's not going to be an issue whatsoever. But a lot of people have been talking about, there's only 2 viable marksmen. And if that's truly the case, then we maybe see him back on Mages or Garen.
Should we play a game, like Meta Breaker game, if you want to introduce some stuff? Because
I've been waiting for Caitlyn Morgana.
Yeah,
because
that was good.
You're also, okay, never mind. I'm not smart then. Everybody's thinking Caitlyn because Caitlyn is one when everyone brings up this, there's only 2. I'm like, I think there's always a place for a strategy for Caitlyn tower pushing, right? Mm-hmm. And you pair it with Morgana, you have that bind combo. I think there is a lot of power there in a best of 5 to be able to use things like that.
I honestly just actually think that Xayah with lethal tempo is just like hands down.
Yeah, we're talking about past the.
When the 2 are nerfed away.
Yeah.
Okay, I thought you were saying as an answer to the 2. I was like, I'm pretty sure that Caitlyn, as great as Piltover Peacemaker is, like you're just actually.
Everybody is on board.
We're on board with the number 1.
Everybody's on board. Oh, Xayah.
Yeah. All right, pass that. Okay, I'm willing. Okay, sorry. I was like, all right.
But and another thing is this is 2 different points actually. So one is a lot of marksmen got buffed leading up to Worlds, right? So Caitlyn being one of them, obviously, and I think she's probably the front runner. But we saw several others as well, Lucian being among them, which tails into the second point, which is that we actually see marksmen played in other lanes, right? So Trist mid, Lucian mid, played by Rookie. Jace technically is a marksman, doesn't fill that role, but is there and is some like decent range physical damage, at least for turret pushing and other things like that. So that's just sort of the other 2 points I want to bring up is that I think there's a very wide B tier. I don't know if I agree necessarily with the point that there's only 2 viable marksmen. I think there's certainly 2 top tier marksmen. hard agree with that one. It's really Azael, and like there's a Stefan's Kai'Sa, and there's like 17 champions. What's nice is you don't have to play marksman because you can get that profile of damage and that team fight threat from 2 or 3 other roles.
I don't know if anyone even liked that game at all, but there are other ones that I'm thinking of because we can see completely different style games in quarterfinals. Oftentimes in a best of 5, 2 teams will develop into much longer games. Like we've had quarterfinal series that have had 3-minute averages higher than the group stage average game times. Like if you turn into a long game, all of a sudden jungles like Karthus and things start to come in play. I feel like there are more of these champions that are good right now, but good for a different style of game than we've been seeing. And you can try and like force that different style of game, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's going to be a really compelling read. That's actually something I think is underrated and underappreciated. Is if you have the read that this is not going to be your normal game of League of Legends, and you make a team comp call off that, that's super intelligent.
Yeah, I think that like the long game ones are the ones that I think are always easier to see, because I think that it's safe scaling always feels like a reasonable bet to me, and it's on your opponent to punish that, right? Whereas like the ones that I'm really curious to see if they come out are the Lucians played bot lane champions, where like if you want to outclass some of the other top tier picks, like you kind of need to have an impact early game. Of course, Lucian always has that like theoretical, really sick output in late game fights. It's just so much harder to get than from a Xayah or a Kai'Sa, and those are the ones that always surprise me. And especially when you look at a team like Fnatic, like they will bet on some of these like less stable picks. Usually it's in the hands of Bwipo, but I would not be surprised if when Rekkles gets pushed back off of these primary picks, if he pulls out something more early game focused. I hope no more Garen Yuumi. Even if I have to eat my own words early in the tournament when I said it was dead. It's definitely not dead. It's really, really powerful. It's still really insanely good. It's just like you pretty much auto lose pressure on bot side, which I just don't think is worth it.
Yeah. I think it's really good against low DPS teams, though, because if you can't actually break the Garen, I mean, that spin does like 1,000 base damage level 18 without items.
Like the Cloud9 game, right?
Yeah, where it's like, well, they're running Sona, and it's like, turns out Garen can't die.
Also, when Garen presses W, big front-loaded damage reduction, and this window is not where you want to throw all your burst into.
Yep.
So we kept seeing like picks on Garen, and then all this burst damage being thrown into him, and you're like,
yeah.
To be fair, we saw the same thing on like Leona supports. So many teams were like super desperate for picks and would just like throw everything into a single character they could not kill, and then immediately lose the following team fight.
Yep.
That was like a huge trend over groups.
I think Garen W should be more visually aware when you activate
it's reworked already, so don't worry about it. That's actually already been happening.
Big rip. Next up, we have Griffin IG or SKT Splice. How do you guys want to hit it? Should we hit SKT Splice? I feel like that's the pretty relatively. Let's not call it cut and dry. Let's just say
SKT wins 3-0.
Whoa.
Anyone want to challenge me on this one? Azael?
No.
Kobe?
Do you remember?
Nope.
Do you remember
Drakos.
before
SKT 3-0?
Do you remember before the show?
All right, we agree. It's SKT
when I was
3-0.
like, I'm going to ask someone to be the devil's advocate here, and you agreed
and I
to be.
jumped out in front of that one. Was like, hate me, dog.
I'll do it then. My boy Kabi is gonna pop off. Have you ever seen
Wow,
a
you're so
marksman
biased.
player
He's me with
carry
an
as
extra
hard?
B.
Yeah, it's just you with an extra B.
He learned from the greatest. I mean, he knew what he was doing when he selected that name.
That's true.
Honestly, though, he's such a
His
hard
last name or
carry freak.
Yeah. It's going to be really hard to
Probably
carry.
Stop smacking
this
the
team
table.
with
'Cause
North
it sounds
Baron
good
on
for
it.
us, but I don't think it's going to sound good for the people.
That's
at home.
true. Freak did it before.
I know, I'm
and I'm
sorry.
like, Freak, don't do that. And I'm like, no, I'm doing it.
I'm a bad influence. I'm sorry about that. Yeah, go ahead.
So they are going to clean up all of their mid-game problems by warding their flanks when they push up for towers, for team fights. They'll have vision behind them this time around. Everything will be, it'll all be just dandy.
So
Okay?
they're just gonna be
They're
much
gonna
better, and
protect
that's how they
Kabi.
Okay.
All right.
Increase that ward per minute.
To give a real like argument, and this is this is why I think it's going to be a 3-0, is because I think this is so unlikely. But when you look back to, say, SKT Misfits, and when you look back to a lot of the crazy upsets that on paper are supposed to be, insanely one-sided. Yes, SKT did still win that series, but it was made close.
TLIG, another one.
Yeah. I think, you either A, need a massive underperformance from the favorite, or B, oftentimes it's through when we think of these huge upsets, it's through surprise picks and creativity and being able to do something that your opponents are not ready for. And I don't think that's Splice. So that is why I think it's unlikely, but I do still think that is their best shot. I do still think that they should be spending this time prepping different picks, prepping counter picks, whether it's still through their style. I think that's okay, right? But maybe you just all in on like Caitlyn Morgana, and leaving Xayah open and trying to slam that bottom lane. Maybe you all in on something for Humanoid where he feels really confident in lane, trying to orchestrate matchups where he can get huge advantages and then try to snowball the game through that. Of course, that's incredibly difficult because all the players individually on SKT are fantastic. But if you just try to play the same style as SKT, the same way you're doing with the same meta picks, you are just a much worse version of what they are doing, right? And I think that is why it's such a bad stylistic matchup for Splice, because we need to see them, find some way to kind of break free of their mold. And I think the best shot for that is really to try something still within your wheelhouse, because you're not going to become G2 overnight, but to find matchups and lane advantages and try to draft heavily for that to surprise SKT and take games through that way.
Now that he's done, back on track, they're going to channel Misfits, and they're going to pick up where they left off,
You know what, Kobe? I'm so glad that you can be this person for the podcast.
Know what the key is going to be? Everybody's going to take stopwatches, and SKT going to dive again like we saw versus Fnatic. That'll be one game. Then they bring out the surprise picks for the Wombo, or like after they've already got the one game lead.
And then the reverse sweep happens, and SKT still wins. Okay, we're on board.
Wait
a second, what just happened?
So what I'll say is that a couple things to Splice's credit. Like they're a team that all year has been chasing good fundamentals, and for a number of reasons have always had that sloppy mid game as a result of players kind of taking their eye off the ball, let's say. But they have been willing to innovate. They have tried new things. They showed it in spring against Fnatic, Kabe busting out Veigar. We've seen lane swaps. So I think that this team can be very creative when they're at their best, but I think that the struggle for this team is that very often they haven't gotten the opportunity to be creative because they've had to spend so much time just locking those fundamentals down. So on a good day, they can go even, they can pull out the crazy picks. Does that let them go toe-to-toe with SKT? At their best, probably not. That's the tough part. But at their worst, and this is my biggest fear, Vizichachi is super exploitable in pick ban, right? He wants a safe blind pick, and his counter picks are all mostly just safe blind picks. That's what he does. Norskanen is a woefully inconsistent player. Played one of the best Thresh games of his career in this group stage. Also ran it down harder than he's ever ran it down in his life.
With the Leona game, yeah.
Yeah, and it's hard to know which version shows up. Top and support are both super volatile. Humanoid is also a guy who sometimes plays out of his mind, and while he's never inting, sometimes has games where he is just meh. So for me, Splice, I think on the best day, if SKT's underperforming, they can contest, they can do all the things that you want from them. It can be crazy, but I think it's fair to call it a 3-0 for SKT.
Honestly, though, actually trying to craft one of these game plans, because we talked about earlier where there are some picks where they are much stronger if you change the way that the game is going to flow. And Azael was talking about, these are the types of strategies you need to go to. For me, one of the biggest ways to do that is level 1 invades with things like, hey, we're going to have Karthus. We're going to split the map. Clid and Faker are extremely dangerous duo. Oh, well, you know what? We're going to section off the map so we know he can only have 50% of the area normally to work with. Then you get to play out the other team reacting to how you started out this game. You get to kind of, jumpstart with some initiative there where your plan going in. You're trying to get this advantage where you can get an early farm clear. We saw it in play-ins, specifically with the Karthus jungle. And that's just one example, right? But it's those types of things where you so heavily craft the beginning of the game from your level 1 and can involve lane swaps, can involve these very complicated champion selects. But if you so heavily prepared this opening, then you force, at least for the beginning of the game, for the enemy to play catch up, and they have to think through the counters and what they're going to be able to do with this. And oftentimes it takes away those one-on-one matchups.
I really like the level 1 idea because we even saw TL use that against Dom 1, right? And yes, the game did turn disastrously, but I still maintain that level 1 was brilliant, and the lane swap and the way they orchestrated that was so good. So I would love to see that kind of preparation coming in from Splice.
And to be fair, Splice has, a pretty massive coaching staff, all of whom I think have gotten high praise from players or former players from the team that they've worked with. Duke, Mac, Peter Dunn, and there's a few more. Sorry if I missed your name. But these guys have been just very diligent about prepping, and that has always been their strongest aspect coming in. Now, admittedly, if you look back, the Rogue series was one that people will always hold against them in playoffs. But I do generally think that similar to like how Origin has been perceived in the past, this is a team that should do very well with prep. In a best of 5, like they should be at their strongest. They should be the best version of themselves. Where if you told me they had to make it out of a best of 1 group stage, I'd say, good luck. We'll come back. We'll come back next year, and it's tough, but they did it. So optimism definitely for the best of 5 coming in for Splice, but pretty much universal 3-0.
Yeah. This is. I'm actually kind of glad about this draw because this is like the most fair to everyone else quarterfinal draw, right? like
sacrifice Splice so the rest can live.
Yeah, it's
right. The rest of EU is happy about that because it means G2. Fnatic couldn't draw them, but G2 gets an easier opponent because SKT is probably the best team at this turn right now, and it's. I'm glad IG got to dodge them.
And being from NA, I always really have commiserated and really like the underdogs. I actually kind of like the position where, you can only do above expectations that people have for you. If everyone thinks it's an 0-3, try your wild stuff, right? Try and patch up some of the holes with some creative planning. You throw out stuff like that, people will very rarely cut you down, right?
Yeah.
Nobody's going to flame them for trying to go for some crazy lane swap level 1 strategy or whatever, or try and do these.
You were clearly going to win the game, Splice. Why would you throw it away on a crazy level 1?
Exactly. Everyone's like, can get behind that. Like, take that chance. Do some crazy stuff. Let's go.
Only you blind picked Orianna against Faker, you would have won.
Yeah.
If you guys remember back to the Misfit series, I mean, people bring it up a lot, but like that was so exciting. Yeah. Because we had strapped ourselves in and we're like, all right, well, this is going to be the dud quarters, right? I think you were even casting it.
I got to cast that. I got to cast the G2 upset over RNG. I've gotten to cast a lot of great European upsets.
When that Leona came through,
that game,
yeah.
And we saw the runes coming in, like in lane, we see him trading, and we're like, wait, does he have fervor? And you see this Leon start going out, and you're like, hey, no! And like
slapping his ass.
Everyone in the caster room was just jumping. We're like, oh my! Like everyone roots for the underdog. I mean, SKT may be one of the most loved teams throughout the world, one of the most popular. I think there were a bunch of stats as far as viewers. The top 5,
the most viewed games.
Every SKT game was the most viewed game across the world, across platforms.
And the thing is from a behind the scenes perspective, right? Like,
oh really?
Yeah.
I thought it was even. Okay, it's definitely okay. That makes sense because I was like, really?
They're gonna watch the RNG game.
I know Faker actually has a lot of fans in China.
Yeah. So it might be the same, but the stats that I saw online, which is probably what you're looking at, excluding China.
Yeah.
So what's interesting about that, right, is everyone remembers this as this like huge innovative moment, but the reason that they had to do that and that we had to see like Maxlord playing Ivern to be the Ardent carrier because Ardent was so strong was because of like they couldn't play other things in scrims. They were wildly unsuccessful on the mage supports and scrims. And it just reminds me in the Splice situation and why it lines up for me is that like restriction breeds creativity, right? Like, Vizichachi's champion pool is hilariously small, right? And has a lot of limitations. But with that, you can find some like real brilliance to counter the meta because you're forced into a scenario where you innovate or you die. Whereas everyone else can play the meta picks. You have to come up with something crazy like Fervor of Battle Leona, know? And if it works, it works. All the more power to them. I'm excited to see it. But Griffin versus IG, thoughts? I don't even know where to start with this one. Everyone else has had a European representative, so I've gotten to like come in with pride or like fear. But this one, I obviously have much less of like an emotional stake in.
Well, to me, an interesting thing is how Griffin have maintained a lot of their like controlled style. Just briefly looking over, of course, it's just group stage stats, so it's not a lot of games, but they still have some on the lower side of the combined kills per minute. Tarzan still has low early jungle proximity, and yet they have one of the highest gold leads early on in the game at 15 minutes. And it's because they've continued with the similar things that we've seen from them from LCK, which I was very skeptical that that would be able to transfer over on the world stage, and and when we see meta shifts and going against IG, I think that will be tested very heavily because IG is like they're looking very much back to like we have the best solo laners in the world. Like that, you could make a case for that, for several of the teams here. But IG are looking very strong again in that same vein, and they put Ning back in. Ning is the most in your face.
Oh my!
Like this guy just plays turbo cleave. He is going for 1-for-1 trades all the time.
Yeah.
He to me is the antithesis of Tarzan. Tarzan is they're like yin and yang here, and I'm just like I am excited to see these clash. This may be one of the biggest clash of styles of all of our quarterfinals, so that might be one of the overarching things.
I become a bigger fan of Ning every year. I love two things about him. One is I think he really, really, really knows how much damage he can deal. Right, like because you don't. Yes, he can be wrong sometimes. Like don't get me wrong, but this is a dude who tower dives and more often than not does get the kill for it, which is great. The other half of it is he doesn't care if he dies. I know these all sound like negatives at the very start of it, but the dude goes 1-for-1 really often, which is I think really useful. I think back to the
if it's for a carry, if you're trading
yes,
out.
well, yes, that's the point, right? It's like
I had this exact explanation of him when we were leading up to the World Championship last year.
All right.
And I was like, yeah, it's so smart, right? When you go 1-for-1 with the enemy AD, and your Rek'Sai late game, I'm all behind you, right? It's
great.
Genius.
Yes, and in a similar case, is I just think back to the absurd final day IG Damwon game where he tower dives Nagari, and it's like we went 1-for-1, but I got an assist, so we got more gold, and you're not getting that farm in the turret, and there's 2 more plates for the Shy. So this was 1-for-1 kill, but it's 1-for-1 kill and 2 turret plates and 3 waves, and it's like, oh, that's a great trade. You should always die for that.
You also brought up the tower dive where Showmaker got a 3-kill Akali.
That's the other side of that coin. That's the other side of that coin.
That was led by Ning.
Yeah. You're right.
Ning actually caused that triple kill, I think, more than Showmaker.
So is Ning really the MVP
Yeah.
of the group
So as
stage?
much- I'm totally behind all of the whole speech.
Your point is valid.
And I'm like, sometimes.
So Ning can be the world's finals MVP, or Ning can solo lose you a game, right? And I actually am really concerned for IG going into this because they swapped out their jungle, right? So they struggled once the roster came back together. They weren't all together, and then they actually reformed the roster. They were playing with Ning. Ning was not working at all with Rookie and the Shy throughout the back half of the split. In week 10, they actually did bring in Leanne, and they tried him. It was okay. And then, in their quarterfinals matchup, they lose that pretty heavily, going back and forth between them. Then they go fully away from Ning. They get through the gauntlet. They're in Worlds. First week, only Leanne. And then week 2, Ning comes out. What does that tell you? To me, that tells me that they are not performing well in scrims, and they don't think that they're at a high enough level to win with that. Even then, after that, to reaffirm this even more, Rookie had an interview where Laura asks, "Why did you bring back Ning?" And how did you think about Leanne, essentially? And Rookie was like, "Oh well, Leanne doesn't have enough experience yet. Like, I hope he can get more experience." And Ning has a lot of experience, essentially, right? Like, so you can kind of count on that. So to me, that says like, okay, well now you're back to square one, right? Like they still clearly have jungle issues. You're going into week 2 of Worlds, and you still haven't figured it out after the whole split. So I think that's actually extremely concerning when Tarzan was also one of my candidates for MVP for group stage. I think he's been beast, right? So, that is something where it's really, really concerning. And if you have this guy that, is going to do this crazy, crazy stuff, Tarzan seems like almost like the ultimate jungler to like absorb and deflect and kind of stop that.
Sure.
And Griffin gets advantages often not by playing slow, but by not playing bloody, right? They don't actually fight. They just win lanes, and they take turrets, and they take dragons, and they take Rift Herald. So that is my really big concern for this series, and I think it's going to almost entirely hinge on jungle performance.
To me, that matchup of junglers puts a ton of pressure on the Griffin laners for the first 5 minutes of the game. Because the other side of that, working out in favor of Ning, is his first gank is successful. All of a sudden, he's a fed Lee Sin or Olaf or Elise or whatever, and he has the 1v1 advantage over Tarzan, who, path to the other side or something, or got an extra scuttle crab, or got an extra camp, or was hovering for a counter gank on the wrong lane or something like that. It is very risky, but me seeing Ning perform these games, I was like, that looks just like Ning from last year. He hasn't changed too much, I think, and I've heard a lot of the drama, over the years, and it's hard with everything coming out of China, but it sounds like so much emotional and personal issues and relationship stuff. Maybe that manifests in game in communication with people. Maybe it doesn't. I don't know.
And people were speculating that that's maybe why they weren't coordinating well in LPL summer.
Yeah.
So here's my question then. If we all acknowledge that Ning is let's say coin flip, right?
Yeah.
Like, I know players obviously hate being
Aggressive,
high risk, high effort player. Really,
That's different. High effort is a different.
That's just pure flame.
Yeah. No, he is a high risk player. That is absolutely true.
And then is it if it's, do you feel like it's 50-50 down the middle? Is it 60-40? Because when we spoke earlier about G2 and taking 60-40 risks, we said, hey, like that over the course of a series will always favor them. Is this? Would you feel the same way about Ning?
Yes.
Looking in this series.
Personally, I do. Now, that doesn't have to be shared by everyone. I have plenty of hot takes that are not everyone else's hot takes. But yes, I think over the series, Ning will. I don't want to say outperform, because I think like in raw skill, I think Tarzan is higher. But I think the risk taking of Ning will on average pay off. So that aspect of him will, I would think, be a positive in the BO5. That said, like when Tarzan's like, "Hi, I'm waiting for your gank," and Ning's like, "Ah, yes you are. I will turn around now," right? Like, but Tarzan wins that by not wasting time going across the river, and that's just like the action stops. Ning won't 1v2 tower dive. Like, he's not that silly. But as long as Tarzan's making the right calls, then he's going to out jungle him in general.
Someone clip that for me.
Yeah.
Tries to
When
1v2
he
tower
hard
dive.
1v2 tower dives with the 0-2 Olaf.
I think I'm actually on the other side of the coin. I favor Griffin pretty heavily, actually. I think that Griffin has just performed better overall at the tournament. IG got second in their group for a reason. I think that they haven't always been perfect. As much as people look at like the Shy game where he was way up, against Nugri on this Jace versus Vladimir game. And people are like, damn, the Shy played so great that game. I actually looked at that game and I was thinking, okay, good job getting the advantage, but you also started with level 1 first blood. And then I actually thought he kind of ended it away at times. The bottom lane 1-for-1 lost him so much pressure on the map. He actually queued a minion and then, flashed
over to finish it.
Flashed over to finish it. Like there was some mistakes here. This whole game was not clean. And, he started with a huge advantage. And it's like, looking at it from the other perspective, you started with a level 1 first blood on your top laner in a counter matchup and then lost and started trading kills, but later on, right? So I think that is concerning. I just think Griffin's performing at a higher level, and I actually feel like almost, it's required for Ning to be playing at a really, really high level for them to compete. And if that happens, I think IG has maybe the highest ceiling of any team in the whole tournament when everyone is firing on all cylinders. But hasn't been the case thus far, and based on group's performance, I certainly favor Griffin.
Also, the reason why so many junglers idolize Tarzan is because so often his read is correct. You're talking about, if his read is not correct, he has done such a good job. I don't know if it is just him or if they have very good and quick communication with all of his lanes, but he has a very good understanding of the lane state of every lane and what they need and what will the openings be for the enemy jungler, which kind of in the games that you're watching really looks like what can add to the efficiency that he brings to those early games. So if we're talking about percentages also, then you kind of have to throw those percentages on Tarzan and look at like how often does he make that right choice? And it's been very, very, very frequently.
I mean, I feel like that's pretty cut and dry. I guess the final question for me is, you kind of already mentioned it a little bit, Isaac, but when people look at IG, they're just like the Shy rookie, right? Like, these guys are insane. Like, do you see both of these lanes as pretty even matchups overall? Chovy versus Rookie, you know, like people are just gonna be like, "Come on, man! You said it yourself. Like Rookie makes Orianna look like a hyper aggressive early game champion."
I think that there is advantages as far as like solo lane performance for IG, but I also think that especially if you're talking about Chovy was one of the best performing mid laners in the LCK. This is not someone that I think is just going to get slapped around whatsoever, and I also think that Griffin is less reliant on massive solo lane advantages to actually just win the game, right? You know, they do get big advantages early game, but it's often through like really smart and kind of thoughtful team play.
Towers a lot too.
Yeah, and towers a lot. So I mean, there are other ways for IG to get in. You know, Jackie Love I think was actually IG's best player throughout summer. I think he was actually really solid. I think he has played down a little bit from his summer performance. You know, at the World's group stage. So if he can actually have a better performance, you know, if they can get advantages through laning bot, but again, that's tough because Griffin's bot lane is very consistent, right?
Yeah,
you know, Viper is not a dominant laner, but he very rarely loses, and I think it's just like. This is a tough one to call because I don't think that there's like enormous differences really that I'm seeing except in the uncertainty for the jungle.
Yeah,
Okay.
in my mind, there's top difference for the Shy. Like I mean, I agree. Like there's been some mistakes, but like every series, I'll take the Shy over. I mean, I don't like Doran's going to play, but I'll take him over Sword, and I'd take him over Doran. So like, I don't know if that's going to be enough, but like that's one where I think there is a clear cut lead. Everything else is close / Griffin favored.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think even with to me, Sword has overperformed my expectations of him, you know, coming back in and subbing back in. Well. But even given that overperformance, I still give the edge to the Shy.
All right, I'm just super thrilled. I think after this episode, we should all share our respective pick'ems just on the internet. I think so everyone can see. But you all took to Twitter and asked a bunch of questions to me / Phreak because I made the mistake of quote retweeting, which made its own thread.
Our acquaintances.
And yeah, our acquaintances. Thank you for that wonderful tweet.
I really think I should have been classified as a colleague at least.
Given the time you spent together.
At least. I mean, I understand why you removed Azael from being a friend.
Yes.
And you can remove me from being a friend. That's okay.
Yeah. But like, you know, I'm not really a colleague of Drakos. Like we.
You're literally working together right now.
All right. So the Twitter questions. I've lost this.
I've been to your home.
All right, so we have 3 friends on the podcast and Phreak.
Okay,
yes,
there you go.
One.
Fine. Twitter questions. First up from G Georgiev at maximum effort 7 effort. Explain the Panth 100% ban rate, please! ! That champ is not that strong. There are at least 10 other champions that deserve to get banned over Panth. Who wants to take that one?
I haven't honestly played that much Pantheon. I mean, this is tough because the funny thing for me is when I wanted to start actually learning new Pantheon, every game it's banned. So I haven't played a ton. My understanding is really it's a lot to do with the ability to actually like play so aggressively and have survivability while being an incredibly squishy champion. It's largely about this like frontal damage immunity essentially while you have the empowered E up, and that is mostly what it is about. You can dive into the backline, threaten 100 to 0 on a champion, and then be disengaging with your E. It's less about actually using the E offensively and more that these people have to respect the fact that you can actually be killing them off in a team fight, and very few champions can actually do that, right? Like you can't just like run in the back line as Kiana and kind of stand there. It's maybe more similar to how an Akali can kind of create this zone of control with Shroud, but you have more of a risk of like getting CC'd there, whereas Pantheon, it feels extremely consistent. Also in the early game, Pantheon still has the strength of setting up jungle 2v2s so well because you have a point and click stun. So I think it's just a really well-rounded champion that has both like early and late game strengths.
Yeah, I have played a decent amount of Pantheon because I really wanted to play him in the jungle. He's significantly lower win rate in the jungle, which made me very sad. And so I played some top lane games as well. He is absolutely nuts right now. His early game is still oppressive, and he doesn't fall off as hard as people are used to. The old Pantheon, they're like, all right, don't worry, he's trash later. But because of two things. One of the things you mentioned with the utility of the damage immunity is so big for changing the way that he plays later game team fights. He can split push, of course, has the global ultimate, but also the execute is really underrated. And talking to a bunch of the pro players that just hang out in my Discord, they're talking about how that is always makes you relevant for later on in the game.
He's giving me a huge grin.
I'm just sorry. If you want to join Kobe's Discord to hang out with all the pro players, definitely do. So it's just like, it felt like, I know it wasn't supposed to be, but it felt like a very like, my Kobe's Discord over at discord.com/sorry.
Pantheon lovers only.
Continue.
Great.
Sorry.
But because of those changes to his kit, you're absolutely correct in that his early game is still extremely strong, and the utility that you can bring at all stages is so relevant.
My understanding is he's also just a massive flex pick. I've heard about him jungle. I've heard about him bot lane as a support. I've heard about him bot lane as a damage threat.
Support is the most nuts one.
Yeah, I watched Stunt play him a lot of support in solo queue. Actually, he was popping off.
Yeah.
He just does so much damage.
Support Pantheon, and is not going to be Worlds relevant, but the rework on Shaco also.
Yep, also great.
All right, let's try to speed.
What's next?
Let's speed run through a few so we can get a few more people in since so many people ask questions. Tolkien at TolkienCast, what's your opinion on non-traditional bot lanes in this tournament? Garen Yumi. Sona Garen? What? Sona Tom Kent, presumably, is what was meant there, not the Sona Garen. Kale, mages as carries. How do you feel right now?
I have a strong take on this. Mage bots, trash. I looked it up. 0-10 mage bot record in Worlds thus far. 0-11 if you count Sona.
Sneaky one with Heimerdinger.
Okay, then the stats I looked at were wrong. Unfortunate.
I mean, maybe it's
Heimer's not a mage. He's always been a marksman.
Games of Legends
classic
has Heimer with 0 wins.
Oh, what? Yeah, because for sure Sneaky won, right?
You're totally right. So
Yeah.
so the stats I looked at here have Heimer 0-3, Syndra 0-3, the Zoe 0-1, Cassio 0-1, Veigar 0-1, Morgana 0-1, and then the Sona loss as well. So maybe the stats are incorrect because you're totally right.
But
Sneaky
those
did
all,
win.
I remember those as losses though. Like, those pickups.
Still maintain trash.
Just because you show us the incorrect work doesn't mean that.
Yeah. I still think non-traditional bots are good because there's been a bunch of Syndra games, and I'm trying to remember if those all lost as well.
0-3.
Okay,
It's what this says.
No.
But again, maybe wrong.
But regardless, right? Like that's a valid point because we know Yasuo's have been solid. Nuclear won on that champion
Also
as well.
good. Yeah.
I mean, he was fine in that
Yasuo,
game, but that game
sorry,
was a
Yasuo.
snowball.
Go sorry. Go
Yeah,
ahead.
no, that's fair. I hold out hope. Like as a bot laner, I still like the idea of playing different things. Like I jumped on a Ziggs hype train a year and a half ago when that first came out. Yeah, I guess it's not working.
Kale also won a game. I don't know what we want to classify that as.
Kale's not the reason they won, and also not a
really
mage.
call Kale a
She's
mage,
not a
yeah.
mage. So yeah, I mean, results are showing that it's not winning, so they should probably stop, I guess.
Yeah, I don't think they're bad. I think they still are useful, but you make other changes with your comp also. Like SKT's Kale game you're talking about, where they flex picked it with Tristana, switching the matchup, and then using Tristana oppressive mid solo lane that has become so popular, like using that effectively. So I would remove the Cassiopeia bottom from the ones I really like. I still do like the Heimer, Syndra, and Veigar. To me, those are my 3 front runners. Even though they have lost the games that they have played at Worlds, I still think that those can be used and should be in your arsenal.
Yeah. I would say like a sample of about 10 games is like it will show you what happened. Indeed, those things, those champions lost, but it's not 10 is not enough to be really indicative of the future. So you're like, well. Doesn't mean they can't be viable, which means they didn't win those games. In those cases, you actually want to look at each one. And it's like, well, Sneaky got slammed just outright, and that wasn't really on Cassiopeia. That was just like better bot lane wins. And you can kind of go through all of them. It's like, the Sona was very good. They just needed, to your point, they needed to flex the comp around. They needed to find a marksman that could kill Garen at some point in late game, because Sona is not really a Garen counter pick in that you're going to win team fights. You're going to have a really good lane and a really farm Sona. But something else has to fit that comp.
Makes total sense. Sadly, that is all the time we have. Thank you so much for watching Divephoria Episode 2. We will be back after quarterfinals with some menagerie of acquaintances, as Phreak would.
Depends on who's sick.
A menagerie.
Does depends on who's sick. But thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for submitting Twitter questions, and we'll see you guys later. Farewell.